one told me about him, how people cry. Well, it's too late to say you're sorry. How would I know? Why should I care? There's no bother trying to find him. He's not there. Well, let me tell you about the way he looks, the way he acts, and the color of his hair. His voice is soft and good, his eyes are clear and bright, but he's not there.
Welcome back. This is Dave Tubman, the author of the book Jimmy Hoffa is Missing the Gap, and this channel is JHIMTG, the initials of the title of the book. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd appreciate if you could subscribe, like, follow, and share with as many people as you can. Most of this information is related to the eyewitnesses who are my parents, Kenneth and Frances Tubman, and what they saw. But today I'm going to be dealing with this is chapter 5, and this led up to me prompting my mother to finally tell the story to the FBI. And it was because I saw an article in the paper. I was living on the West Coast. She was still in Detroit. She was still in the apartment in Willow Creek in Westland that she had shared with my dad his last years. He passed in 1987, and this was in 2006. So it was a good 31 years after Hoffa disappeared. It alerted me when I saw in the local paper that the FBI had sent over 200 agents to dig up a farm in Milford Township. I thought, why are they still looking for Hoffa's remains? I thought this was solved a long time ago. So I'll kind of summarize the transcript here shortly, but the article itself, they had, I guess it was May 17th, started a dig, and it lasted for 2 weeks in Milford Township. And Milford Township is a small town in Oakland County, and it was kind of just kind of overrun by these FBI agents and the news media, and the local inhabitants kind of made a show out of it, selling souvenirs, and the businesses were thriving and restaurants were busy. So they kind of were appreciating all this attention they were getting all of a sudden. What happened was Tony Zerilli, of course the mob boss in Detroit, disappeared, but his son kind of took command, and he was still contacted as far as giving the approval for Hoffa's hit before it was done. There was a rumor that was passed around, and there's other parts to this rumor besides just that Hoffa's body was buried at this farm. We'll get into it at another time. It involves a house that was owned by Frank Tocco, and Sal Palazzolo. So I'll discuss that later. Right now I just want to focus on this story, which was all these FBI agents, they were told that they should look for a shallow grave and near this barn. So Damalday was in on this story, and was really excited about it, of course. But the story was, so they dug up this barn and spent 2 weeks, didn't find anything. But a lot of the information they had really did sound promising as far as this might have been what happened to Jimmy Hoffa that day. So I'm referring to an article by Tom Krushner. He was an Associated Press writer, and this was in the Napa Valley Register. I was living in Napa Valley at the time. But he mentions that it's one of the most intensive searches in decades looking for Jimmy Hoffa's remains. They had archaeologists, anthropologists, heavy equipment, and they were going over this horse farm, turned out to be Roland McMaster's earlier. The agent in charge at the Detroit field office name was Daniel Roberts, and I took note of that because I thought if I could convince my mother to talk to the FBI, he's the one I needed to contact. He was in charge of the case, and which I did. So I called my mother. I said, this is something that I need to ask her about. We hadn't talked about it. Once I moved, it was kind of a back burner item in our life. So in a moment here, like I said, I'll read some of that transcript of the call I made to her and what we spoke about. We spoke about the whole story again. I just wanted to refresh my memory of how it went, because I had heard it so many times before I moved away in 1976. So here we go, page 79 of the book. And again, there's a free book for you right there. If you want to go through this, you can do a search or read the entire book at your own pace. Below that is the Facebook page where you can get links and other information. And also don't forget to check out the resource Dropbox that I have with so much of the information that I've accumulated. Thousands and thousands of pages are listed in there. The FBI, the FOIPA, the Vault, the Hoffa memo, and updates. So check it out. I read the newspaper that morning over a cup of coffee, getting ready to do some of my work. I had a sign business. And so I was prompted to call my mom. At first, I was concerned about her health issues, so I took the subject lightly. Didn't know how she would take it, and kind of check out her anxiety level. Once I knew she was doing okay, I went ahead and mentioned the article to her. And I'll read you just some of the text here. You're aware of the whole story, I'm sure, by now, so I'm just going to give little bits and pieces here, but it's in the book in its entirety. And for 89, she's pretty good. She remembered every bit of the details that I remember hearing from her. So I do have at the end of chapter 4 a diagram of Telegraph Road and the path that was taken in different positions of the Tubman car and the O'Brien car, the Mercury, and little summary. It's a good reference page that I made up with the information I had. And we didn't dawdle, we just got right into it. So I said, can you tell me that story again about what you and Dad saw on July 30th, the day Hoffa was abducted? She said, yeah. She said they were rushing to get over to my sister's house. They had to be there before John got home, which was about 5. And I said, well, which way did you go to the house from the townhome? And she said the fastest way was over to Telegraph, go down Woodward to Maple, go over to Telegraph, and then head south and take that over to, I think she said Ford Road. Let's see. Well, I don't see it here, but they would either take Ford or Michigan. Helen lived in the vicinity of Telegraph in Michigan or Ford Road, but a bit west of that intersection. And she said, well, right after Dad turned on the Telegraph, he stayed in the left lane. It seems like it was pretty soon after we were on Telegraph, I caught out of the corner of my eye this big burgundy or maroon car that kind of lurched out of the driveway just as we were passing by the Marcus Red Fox restaurant. She was very familiar with the restaurant, as most of us were. My dad was in the restaurant business. And she said it pulled up right behind us, pretty close to our car. So, of course, I said, do you know what kind of car it was or what color? She said, well, no, we found out later what kind of car it was. They said it was a Mercury. I just knew it was a big maroon car. It was a luxury car, like a Lincoln or something like that. So this is where her voice kind of picked up a little in pace. So she said they were following behind us for a bit, and then so we're both in the far left lane, number 4 lane is what I'm referring to as, next to the median, and heading south. And she said then they started to pull up right alongside us, right next to me on the passenger side of the car, and they drove even with us for a little bit. I said, tell me what was going on. And she said, I was looking straight at the driver of the other car, and he was really checking us out, looking at the car. Then he'd look at Dad and I again, and I looked over and I noticed in the back seat there was a lot of commotion going on, and I tried to figure out what was happening back there. I said, like what? Well, there were 2 big men in the back seat. They had their knees way up into their chests, both fighting or struggling with something on the floorboards. And I saw something in one of their hands that seemed like a rope or a leash. I don't know. I remember it was like a strap or something. So I thought maybe they're trying to keep some big old dog down on the floor in the back. It just seemed really strange to me. So I kept looking, and the driver kept looking back at me, really glaring at us. I asked if my dad was also paying attention. She said, well, he was driving, but he glanced over and saw both of us staring at each other and said to me, Francis, quit looking over there. That's the mafia. Quit looking. And I asked him, what do you mean, mafia? I thought he was kidding around. And he said, that's Chucky O'Brien driving the car. Turn around and stop looking at them. It's the mafia, Francis. So how did my dad know? I said, how did Dad know it was definitely Chucky O'Brien? I'm asking the obvious questions. It had been a while since I heard the story, and I knew the story, but I wanted to see what her responses would be. So I asked her as though I didn't hear the story. So I said, how did he know it was definitely Chucky O'Brien? And she said, well, I think Dad knew him from the years he was at Darby's. They all came in there, and he was the one who would greet them and seat them at their tables, and she's right. And he knew all the people that came in there. Sometimes the mafia did come in to eat. It was a popular place till it burnt down in 1968. Dad's boss, she didn't remember, but it was Sam Boeski, may have been involved with the mafia. Dad wasn't, of course, but he had to know who they were so he could welcome them at Darby's, and he better know their names and who they were. So I did ask her what happened in the car. She said, I looked at the driver again, see if he looked like he was in the mafia and what Dad was talking about. And I kind of studied him a little bit. I could only see from the top of the shoulder, the top of his head, but I noticed he had a round face and head, and he had long sideburns and a higher receding hairline. Remember, he's looking straight at her, just like I'm looking at you. And he was dressed a lot more casual than the other men I noticed in the back seat that had suits on. Now this is the part I'm going to tell you because she said it, and I don't know why she thought they looked like they had hats on. So it's not conclusive, but just because she mentioned it, I think it's once the word mafia was out there. Just a few years before that, they did wear hats. When I went to the Fisher Theater with the Jackalonis, he didn't wear a hat, but the guys behind us had hats on with trench coats. So the typical mafia garb. So then she said, I looked back at Ken. He said, and I said, they've got a big old dog or something down on the floor, and they're trying to keep it down there. Dad said, who knows? Quit looking. What was strange to us was the driver was more curious about us than we were about them. We didn't feel threatened or anything. I mean, they weren't doing anything to us or making us afraid of anything. And of course, they didn't see Hoffa. So we were just looking and staring at each other, except for the two men in the back seat. They weren't looking at me at all. So I said, then what? Now this happened twice, and the total riding side by side was over, I guess, 5-mile stretch. And at the normal speed limit with light to medium traffic, that's about a 12 to 15 minute drive from 15 mile now to 10 mile is where they're finally came to a conclusion here. So she said the Dad tried to speed up a little, and the other car drifted back in the next lane. Then it pulled up right alongside us again, and the same thing went on. I was watching and what was going on in the back seat and looking back and forth at the driver. Dad told me again, stop looking, it's the mafia. You want to end up in the Detroit River? He was getting upset at me for watching, but I couldn't help but look. So there was definitely something going on back there, and it was strange. So I'm looking and trying not to look at the same time. She said that a number of times. So I said, you've told me before where the other car went after that. And she said, oh yeah, so Dad slowed way down and let them go ahead of us. Then we both were watching them by now. And they went up ahead and in front of us in the number 4 lane. I guess it's quite a distance. I don't know how far it was. The map I just drew so it would all appear on the same image, but it could have been further than what the map shows, further apart. And also the map shows that the car went across Telegraph, turned left, and then around the Raleigh house. Well, there is absolutely no aerial shots of the Raleigh house going back to the 1975. I've tried over and over to get it. I'm going to ask for it from the FBI. They have floor plans and everything else. So I'm going to see if I can get that through the Freedom of Information Act, and I'll publish that as soon as I have it. So they do get up. They turned left at the turnaround ahead of us and pulled over and up behind the Raleigh house. And I've already told you my dad was hired there in 1974. He knew exactly the building was. It was the Raleigh House Banquet Hall. They're generally closed unless they have banquets or for dinner, and this was before the dinner hour. By now, they were at the Red Fox after a lot of study and their time frame and all the information from my sister, and of course notes and stuff. It was 2:45 as they passed the Red Fox, so this would have been close to 3 o'clock, or maybe even a few minutes after. So I'm sorry I interrupted what she had said to me, but she said we saw them go across Telegraph at the turnaround up ahead of us, and then they pulled over up behind the Raleigh House, the banquet place Dad was going to work at one time, and that was 1974. I said, yeah, I remember him talking about that. It was only a year before all this. He was going to take a job running the kosher kitchen, but somehow someone told him it was run by the Jewish mafia, so he turned it down. But go on, Mom. So she said, well, we were going really slow by then, and Dad and I were really curious about what was happening and why they were so interested in us. So as we get up to about where the Raleigh House was, first on the other side of Telegraph, and I've already told you the distance turns out to be about 150 feet from where their car would be to the back corner of the Raleigh House, approximately. And she said, and Dad and I were both looking really close now, and we saw the maroon car had come to a complete stop over behind the back right corner of the building and stuck out 2/3 of a car length, far enough to see it was the same car, she said, that was following us. Then as we looked off to the right, we both noticed a big garbage truck. He was just sitting there near the other car and where it had just pulled in. Dad said it was a Detroit City garbage truck, like the one he used over at Darby's. So it sounds to me that Dad was positive that Chucky O'Brien was driving the maroon car next to you, I said. And then she said, well, Dad knew him. I didn't know who Chucky O'Brien was, not at that time. After we got home from visiting with Helen, you were there a few days later. We saw his picture on the news. It turns out that wouldn't have been till August 5th, I think, is when they had traced the maroon car from a sighting at the Red Fox to Joey Giacalone and then to Chucky O'Brien. That's when it was published for the first time in the news. Almost a week. Yeah, it was about a week after the occurrence. So my parents knew exactly the car, the driver, where it went, and all that. When they realized it was Hoffa, they saw on that would have been in the floorboard in the back seat. So I said, well, when did you and Dad first realize you most likely saw the abduction of Jimmy Hoffa that afternoon? I said, well, we didn't really see Hoffa. We just saw the driver and the men in the back seat of the maroon car that they say Hoffa was in. So you went off to Helen's, I said. And she said, yes, after that we searched our heads and went off to Helen's. We didn't really know what had actually seen that day until it came out in the news a couple of days later. So I said, so did either you or Dad ever tell the police or the FBI what you guys saw? My Mom said, no, Dad made me promise not to repeat that to anyone. He was emphatic about that. He said, that's the mafia, you'll end up as minced meat. So no, I never told the police about it. So she said, I said, do you think Dad might have gone to the police? She said, no, I'm positive he didn't. Your dad had that thing happen to him back at Darby's with the car he got from his boss, Sam Boeski. And he knew not to fool around with the mafia. And I told her, I remember that story too, that you told us about the fuse that fell out of the gas tank. And she says, yes, do you remember that? I said, yep, I was there. I was living at home in Oak Park. So the rest of our conversation was really about the news article, and we both wondered why they're still looking for Hoffa's body. My dad thought he was off the hook once all this information, they had O'Brien, they had the Maroon Mercury. He figured they had their guys and they would be well on their way to wrapping this case up. And the FBI actually boasted that they would be solving this quite rapidly. Unfortunately, they never did. So I knew what I wanted her to do, but I didn't want to get her riled up, so I just kind of calmly asked her if she'd be comfortable with a situation if I relayed the story to the agent that was named in the article, Daniel Roberts. And I said, I told her the same thing, and the agents would tell her when they came to talk to her. I said, these guys are probably all dead. The mafia isn't what it used to be. And besides, I'm sure the Hoffa family would really appreciate knowing, this part of the story. And I asked if she would be open to the idea, and she said, I guess so. Dad isn't here anymore, and I suppose it would be the right thing to do. So I ended the call with, let me call you back, Mom. So once I looked up the agent in charge, found his name in the article again, called the Detroit field office, and I spoke to him. He didn't go out, obviously. He sent out a couple of agents, probably younger, may not have even been around when the Hoffa incident happened in '75. They asked about her and where she lived, and I said, well, let me get back to you. So I called my mom back. I said, they want to come see you. Can I give them your address and will be a good time? And I wanted all the information up front before I talked to them again. So she told me, she said she was okay with the idea, but was nervous about it because it's the first time she'd be telling it to the authorities. So she asked me to mention a few, conditions about her life situation. Couldn't hear, but she also said she needs to know the exact day and time that they're coming, because she always keeps her door locked, and she wears hearing aids. So tell them don't use the regular doorbell button. They have a separate one for the light that flashes. So there's a separate button she wanted them to use. It was loud, and it also had the light rigged to it. And then she said, I did tell them that, but she said she can't see very well, so when they get to the door, she'll be able to look through the peek hole to see who it is. One more thing, tell them not to wear any hats. So I said, okay, no hats. I said, okay, like in The Godfather? And she says, yeah. So I was okay. So I made sure I mentioned that when I called back. And I said, make sure they aren't wearing any hats. He said, okay. He probably thought I was a fool. So I got that interview set up, gave her the day and the time. It was going to be June 27th. And I don't recall the time. It's probably on the transcript. And I said there will be 2 FBI agents that will come to see you, and they won't be wearing hats. So she was relieved to hear that part. I told her call me after the interview and let me know how it went. Of course, I couldn't be there. I was on the West Coast. She did call me. She said there were 2 men. They were both very pleasant. And they were here for quite some time. Took a lot of notes. They asked me lots of questions. I told them, and I made sure they knew Dad wasn't involved with the mafia in any way. And he just knew who they were from working at Darby's all those years, 60 to 68. And they asked me all about the maroon car. How did I know it was definitely Chucky O'Brien was driving? And I told them what I remembered. When I left, they handed me a business card, which I have. It's actually attached to the transcript. But those aren't that isn't the person that came. There were 2 agents. And then she said, thank you. The people aren't a threat anymore when they left. She said they're all either in prison or have died. Same thing I told her. We just want to pass the story along to the Hoffa family so they can have closure. That was their parting words. That made her feel like this was the right thing to do. So I'm going to go ahead and post up this transcript so you can read it. And there's some obvious discrepancies in there which I didn't see. I didn't know we were entitled to a transcript, and I didn't see any need to order one. I figured that's all my mother had to do was to tell the FBI once, and everything's accomplished. Get it out of her mind, off her chest. And I don't know what it is. I don't know how they interview people, but there were several things in this that was just not the way my mother would have told the story. I don't know if she was nervous because they were there. She said it was the first time she had told the story, or if they took wrong notes. I really have no idea why there's discrepancies here. But as I told you the story, that was almost exactly the same every time I heard it, even later. But I'll point out here as I read through the transcript real quick the things that just aren't right. They say that my dad worked for the Darby restaurant. Okay, it's Darby's. And then he worked at the Rotunda Country Inn, that's right. And then the Walnut Lake Country Club, that's not true. At Shenandoah Golf and Country Club in off Orchard Lake Road. And, then it says he applied to work at the Raleigh House and was interviewed for a job. During the interview, given a tour at the facility. Okay, that's fine. Described the cooking area towards having a stainless steel kitchen, stainless steel cutting, walk-in freezer, hamburger grinder. Of course, they had big band saws, floor drains, but that's not in the transcript. No big deal. And it says he was offered a job at the Raleigh House, but he declined it because he heard it was operated by the mob. So there's not a big discrepancy there. It doesn't really affect the storyline. But when I see Tubman Ward, I don't use that married name. She was married to a guy for 2 years, but when she married him, she wanted companionship, and it was I think she was 88 or 87, and the guy's family knew he had Alzheimer's and didn't tell her about it, so she ended up being his custodian, and within months she realized he had Alzheimer's, and he had to go to a veterans home in Grand Rapids where he passed, and of course the marriage was over. So this was not really a marriage, it was an arrangement by the Ward family so that they could have somebody look after Robert Ward, the man that she married for a short time. But anyway, it was a marriage, so they have her recorded in their legal name, Frances Elizabeth Tubman Ward. I just won't be referring to her with that last name. So the transcript continues. On July 30th, Tubman and Ward were traveling to their daughter's home in Waterford, Michigan. It was Westland, Michigan, for a family camping trip. They were driving southbound on Telegraph Road and passed the Maucus Red Fox, who gives the address 6676 Telegraph Road, Bloomfield Township. It says Ward described the traffic that day as being very light and that they were the only ones on the road. Well, there was other people on the road, of course. Soon after they passed the Red Fox, approximately 2:30, a large maroon car, possibly an Eldorado. This is the first time I have ever heard her referred to as an Eldorado, but no big deal again, I guess, passed them, traveling southbound on Telegraph Road. When the driver passed Ward and Tubman, he looked them up and down. The driver had a round face, long sideburns, red hair, and a receding hairline, and was wearing a white collared shirt, which is what he wore that day, according to the Hoffa memo. Now, let me mention one more thing. It says Tubman recognized the driver and advised Ward it was redacted Chucky O'Brien. This car didn't just pass them. It drove side by side within 2 feet in the very next lane, steadily at the same rate of speed. That wasn't presented in this transcript, and I don't know why. My mother would have definitely mentioned that. Eldorado, maybe she was thinking Lincoln and caught Eldorado or Cadillac instead, but I've never heard her refer to that as an Eldorado before this transcript, before I read it in 2009. And then the transcript continues, says, in the back seat of the vehicle were 2 white men wearing dark suits and felt hats. Now, how would she know it was felt hats? They could have very well had their hair, like I said, done up. And people wore hairdos in the mid-70s that, looked sculptured, I guess you might say, and it could have looked like they had on something, but my personal opinion, I wasn't there, I'm telling you what she said. My personal opinion is they probably weren't wearing the hats, but it stuck in her mind, maybe because the mafia word was thrown out there and she was intent that this was the mafia. Maybe she read that into that they were wearing hats. Who knows? But it's not enough to cancel the whole story out, I'll put it that way. So in the back seat were two white men with dark suits. The two men were hunched over with their knees close to their chests. The men in the back seat on the passenger side of the vehicle had both hands down towards the floorboard. The rear passenger on the driver's side had this his left hand down toward the floorboard and his right hand up in the air, pulling on a leash or rope. That's pretty specific as far as how he was holding that, pulling on it. Ward could not see what was on the floorboard, but speculated they were trying to hold a big dog or something down on the floor. The maroon vehicle passed Ward and Tubman's vehicle and proceeded south on Telegraph. The vehicle went to the Raleigh house, 25300 Telegraph Road at 10 Mile in Southfield, and pulled into the back. Ward recalls seeing a large garbage truck at the Raleigh house and that there was no one around the building at the time. Ward and Tubman then continued to their daughter's home and went camping. Ward and Tubman returned from camping and saw the news. Well, they didn't return from camping. While they were camping is when they saw the newspaper, as my sister recounts, about James Riddle Hoffa. Ward saw pictures of Chucky O'Brien on the news and television and recognized him from the maroon car. Now, they didn't say that wasn't for another week. But it wasn't until then that Ward knew and suspected Hoffa may have been on the floorboard of the maroon car. Tubman advised Ward never to speak of what she saw for fear of being killed. That's it. So I guess they got the gist of the story. Now at that time, though, after hearing about the agents, I was glad that she finally got it out of her system. And she did what my mom and dad really wanted to do all those years, but felt, well, they didn't really have to anymore because they had the right guys. But even when he was alive, he always wanted to tell someone, but he didn't. He was protecting the family, not himself. That wasn't the kind of man he was. So I didn't, like I said, order a transcript. Didn't know we were even entitled to it. Never dealt with the Freedom of Information Act before. So this was a done deal. We both were relieved. So we both felt good and maybe even a little vindicated that the Tubman family secret was no longer private, but safely in the right hands now, and even being passed on to the Hoffa family for closure. So next up is Chapter 6, the movie Hoffa, and that's in 2009. The Hoffa family eyewitness home video was made, and I'll talk about that a little bit before I get into the subject matter. But what had happened between 2006 and 2009 was my mom turned 90 in 2007. I'll post up a picture, and we were relieved at this time, so we didn't weren't trying to make light or anything, but we took a picture when my brother and I flew back to Detroit to celebrate her 90th birthday. And I got this idea of, hey, let's fool mom, and we'll put on these schnozola masks with the glasses and the big nose and the mustache, and see if she can guess who we are. We didn't tell her we were going to her birthday party at my sister's. So we show up. I buy a bunch of these for everybody to wear, and we're hiding in the basement, and we're going to surprise my mom for her birthday, 90th birthday. And my sister brings her down the stairs, and everybody's got this mask on. So her test was to go through and guess who everybody was, which started to not really go over too well. Some people she did know, other people she just kind of guessed. The last two was my brother and myself. And she got to my brother Ken, and he has his mask on, and she's looking at him, and she's just a foot away, and she can't figure out who he is. And she says, I don't know. And I don't remember if she guessed other names, but so he took the glasses off, and she still didn't know who he was. So this was a big surprise to her. So she had to tell him, "I'm your son." But you know, she didn't have dementia per se. She just was hard. She couldn't see. That's what it was mostly, or hear. So this was not dementia time yet for my mom. And then I'm taking pictures, so I'm the last one. She has to guess who they are. So I think once she realized that was Ken, well, I had to be David because I'm her other son. So that didn't go over too well, you know. But it was meant to be funny, and hopefully she had a good time. And so we took a picture of my sister and I with my mom at the Detroit Metro Airport right before my brother and I were flying out of Detroit and back to California. We both lived in Napa. So hopefully this isn't too long, but I wanted you to understand the nature of this transcript, not just take it for what it says, and also understand my mom a little bit more. Thank you for watching, joining me. Read on, share, follow, like, subscribe, whatever. Please just pass this story around. I think it's important enough for people to know. God bless.